Introduced in the early days of the Clone Wars and quickly produced in impressive numbers, the Venator-class Star Destroyer served as the main-line capital ship of the Republic Navy throughout the Clone Wars, and would languish in service for decades with first the Empire, and later the succeeding warlords that would fight the New Republic following Endor. Perhaps best known for being heavily focused on starfighter operations over more traditional set-piece line engagements, the Venator would prove to be nearly the ideal design for the Republic during the war. Though advances in tactics and weapons made during the conflict would ultimately see its service life cut short in the early days of the Empire, as newer designs entered service. The Venator measured in at 1,137 meters long, was 548 meters wide, and 268 meters tall. The Venator was much larger than any cruiser-class ship which had come before it in the Republic fleet for over a millennium, and would be very well armed for the period from a gun perspective, though it would be its fighter complement of over 400 fighters and bombers, which represented its main fighting power. In traditional tactical thinking of the post-Ruusan galaxy, the roles and distinction between various warship types was quite clear. Line units acted as the main striking power of a fleet and served as the center around which the rest of the Navy was built. Cruisers served as the escorts for these larger units, as well as acting on their own as commerce raiders, scouts, and flagships in their own right in smaller formations. And finally, the smallest ships, the frigates and corvettes, acted as patrol ships, convoy escorts, and raiders, anti-piracy hunters, transports, couriers, and dozens of other lesser roles. The starfighter, though, had a position of somewhat dubious utility, being thought most useful as system patrol ships, the technology of the day limiting them to sublight engines only, until the development of hyperspace rings improved their range of operations somewhat. But even with these changes, the starfighters of the day were little match when pitted against smaller warships, to say nothing of their capabilities against a battleship or cruiser even. This began to change as droid and other technologies improved. Shield generators and advances in miniaturization of warheads permitting starfighters to suddenly grow more agile, harder to hit, vessels with vastly improved survivability if hit, and greater damage output if they survived to within range of their target. Around the time of the Battle of Naboo, these changes would begin to bear fruit, with a new generation of small, long-legged comparatively, yet powerful starfighters entering the common market which could, in theory, destroy ships much larger than themselves for a fraction of the cost in investment, money, and manpower, with further developments in starfighters resulting in the first ships to mount a hyperdrive as standard, as exemplified by the Y and ARC 70 class starfighters. With the Battle of Naboo proving in the eyes of some that starfighters were absolutely capable of taking on even the largest of proper warships, thoughts began to turn in the battle's aftermath towards how best to utilize their newfound firepower to the greatest effect, which would lead still others to think about how best to defend against them. Defense against starfighters would prove to be, at least to start with, an easy solution, with large flak batteries being added to most ships, and dedicated starfighters to defend the most valuable units of your fleet against the attack of enemy starfighters, leading to the development of a line of specialist interceptors, and, in response to these, a new line of dedicated bombers with increased light armament to deal with these interceptors on their way in. What this meant was that as the Republic began to unravel with the separatist movement gaining traction, warship designers were having to include very large hangars in their ship designs to incorporate the large number of fighters of various types and roles which were anticipated as necessary in modern combat, with no ship being considered competitive unless it had room in its hangar for large numbers of scouts, bombers, interceptors, and multi-role types. Into this complicated environment entered a joint design team comprised of designers from Rendili Star Drive and Kuat Drive Yards. companies which had been approached by the Republic judiciary forces 6 years after the Battle of Naboo about what a modern capital ship might look like. Apparently deciding that the judiciary forces constituted the next best thing to an official order, both companies would work together over the next 2 years to develop a fully fleshed out design. What emerged was a hybrid carrier battleship with heavy for the time gun batteries, impressive point defense, reasonable range and crew amenities, and crucially, a hugely impressive hangar complex taking up nearly 40% of the ship's overall internal volume, allowing the vessel to carry and control very large numbers of fighters. Once this was done, both companies then set about simultaneously going about looking for potential customers, and also fighting amongst themselves about how to share profits between them both. Both companies feeling that they were entitled to a majority of the profits for a variety of reasons, it seeming that a 50-50 split was never considered by either corporation. The search for customers was based on the increasing tensions in the galaxy and the anticipated passing of the Military Creation Act, which would have established a proper military branch for the Republic in the first time in over a millennium, meaning that nearly anyone capable of building large numbers of military hardware had a virtually guaranteed revenue source for the foreseeable future if this proposed Military Creation Act passed and said military created began looking for large amounts of weapons. So certain were Kuat and Rendili of their future success that in the years immediately preceding the First Battle of Geonosis, which would open the Clone Wars, both companies began building fully fledged Venator-class Star Destroyers in their own yards, at their own expense. The idea being that once the Military Creation Act did pass, their offering of capital ship would appear even more tempting to the Republic military, as it was not only an already extant design, but there were several of the class already in service, ready to go. By the time that the Clone Wars broke out with the First Battle of Geonosis, there were a substantial number of Venators ready for service, Kuat and Rendili having already lined up buyers for a surprising number of ships, given that operating such classes of warship was still technically illegal under Republic law. Naturally, once the Clone Wars did break out properly, one of the first things the newly formed Republic Navy did was requisition these ships for their own use, as well as place an expansive series of orders with Kuat and Rendili for more Venator-class ships. Orders which, thanks to the vessels already constructed, they were already tooled up to begin producing in quantity. Quickly forming the core of the Republic Navy, Venators would promptly prove their worth in the first year of the war, where although they were used sparingly due to the limited numbers available, they nevertheless gave a good impression and were responsible for many of the early Republic victories as the line was held following the initial separatist offensives. Early on in the war, Venators were assigned as the personal flagships of the Jedi generals leading the Republic war effort, adding further to their fame in the Republic and infamy in the Confederacy of Independent Systems. 18 months into the war, at what in hindsight would be the halfway point of the conflict, the Republic's massive shipbuilding industry would begin to show, with very large numbers of Venators, as well as the smaller Arquitans and Carrack-class cruisers entering service over the rest of the year. Several hundred of the class being in commission by the beginning of the war's third year, a truly impressive feat. This would be the period when the tide would begin to turn rapidly in the Republic's favor. With the Republic now fully mobilized behind the military and focused solely on the goal of crushing the separatists, the CIS would find themselves pushed back farther and farther into the fringes of the galaxy, their much smaller industrial base and economy proving utterly unsuited to the attritional total war which became Republic policy halfway through the war, showing just how dominant the Venator had become when the droid General Grievous launched an attack against the Republic capital world of Coruscant in the final days of the war. It would be a force of nearly 1,000 of the ships which would come to the aid of the city planet, alongside their escorts, rather than a more mixed force of multiple classes as would have been possibly tradition before the war, or in its early years. This would very much mark the high point of the Venator's service, as advances in anti-starfighter guns, fire control, and target tracking made during the war would quickly render mass starfighter attack largely useless as a tactic against capital ships, leading the Republic to develop late in the conflict the gun-focused Victory-class Star Destroyer. With the newer Victory entering service in numbers, and the Republic being replaced by Palpatine's new order, the Galactic Empire, the Venator's days as a frontline combatant were numbered. The ship being too lightly armed to compete against the latest capital ships, with range too short to be useful as policing and patrol ships in the outer fringes of the galaxy, a strike cruiser meant to operate from friendly bases and attack enemy bases, not being a very good long-term patrol vessel. This combined with maintenance requirements too high to make maintaining the vast fleet of ships built all in service at once. Thus, shortly after the Empire was formed, one of the first things that the new Imperial Navy would do is begin development of a new generation of warship, which better suited its changed operational requirements, even the Victory being found to be less than perfect for the types of missions that the Empire was required to perform now. The Venator would continue in service for a brief period post-war as the main Imperial capital ship, but it was very quickly relegated to other roles, often used as a transport with its cavernous hangar bays converted to cargo and personnel areas as the Empire moved to establish its garrisons throughout the galaxy. This would also enable the ships to move equipment to rebuild the shattered worlds left over from the war. But as the new Imperial class began entering service in the decade after the Clone War, the Venator would begin to find herself on the way out, with many of the ships sent to the scrappers to provide labor and employment for many as part of the Emperor's larger plans to improve the galactic economy by providing jobs. The last Imperial Venators would be taken out of service 15 years after the New Order, and scrapped with very little fanfare, a few final vessels hanging around as training and target ships in various places. But from here, their role in history was largely over. While its time in the spotlight would be brief and violent, and its twilight long, sad, and drawn out, the Venator class marked a major shift in warship design in the galaxy, and a return to major capital ship construction after a millennia of general peace, thus making the ships a distant cousin to the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, which would later become an icon of the tyranny of the Empire. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, all of those normal things. If you really like the channel, I have a Patreon, which should be linked below, that you can join if you want to support the channel monetarily. As a sort of news update for those of you who make it this far, I know there's one or two, though most people stick around largely for the sort of unhinged ramblings that generally end my videos for whatever reason. People seem to like that. News. First bit of news. I have moved. I think I mentioned it in my last video that I was moving and there might be a delay. Well, I've done that. I am now in a new place, and a new place that I am not sure of its qualities as a recording studio. I don't know what the acoustics are like, so this might be very, very tinny or echoey, or it might be a big improvement from before. Camera and mic setups are, well, not camera, because I don't have a camera, because you don't need to see my face. There's less important things in the world. There's more important things, rather. Yeah, definitely. But, generally, I've moved. I'm going to try to fiddle with sound setup in my temporary recording area? ? The other thing is, I, as a part of moving, had to get a new phone plan. You probably just heard my phone making noise there. Had to get a new phone plan, so that, of course, meant that, of course, I am locked out of the Starship Reviews Instagram account, which is very sad. I'm sure you are aware. So, trying to get that resolved, sent Meta, who I guess owns Instagram now and is a company apparently and not a joke, Um, though I did express my suspicion that they were in fact a joke in an email I sent them about troubleshooting and their non-existent customer support. Anyway, yeah, so there's not been a whole lot of posts on that Instagram for the past little while because I've been locked out. Fun times. However, I can still get into email and YouTube and all that stuff, so you can continue to get these lovely videos. That's really all I had to say about that mild rant over. Yeah, I guess I'm just going to quit before this really does become quite awkward. Or I'll just let this sit and go for a little while of silence and jump scare you at the very end. Okay, bye!